Welcome to this week's Facebook Live. So the week of the 4th to the 9th of November is International Stress Awareness Week. So this month, we're focusing generally on stress and specifically on fears and phobias that cause people stress. One of the biggest fears, in fact, I think it's the number one phobia in the United States, is fear of public speaking. That's above spiders and above fear of death. Public speaking specialist Jezz Ray is going to talk to us today. Jezz, can I just hand over to you to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alison. And you hit actually on a major point about public speaking. That survey, it was the New York Times in the 1980s. And they asked people, what were their top fears in life? You know, what were they really concerned about in life? And the top three were public speaking, walking into a room full of strangers, which you and I know as networking. And third, after those came the fear of death. So I'm Jezz Ray. I'm a speech performance specialist, a public speaking specialist. My job in life is to build your confidence so that you feel confident when you're standing up there speaking and your audience feels confident in you.
Okay, that makes me feel almost I'm going to be speaking to the right person today. Because, you know, in terms of, if I think of the times I've had to stand up and do public speaking, it's with an audience I know or an audience I don't, there are times I all of a sudden just become anxious.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to manage that anxiousness at times. And what would you suggest when that happens to me?
Certainly to use some fundamental techniques to give you the confidence to overcome that anxiety, but perhaps just come back one step, because it's always interesting to understand how the brain works in these circumstances. You're never going to change those feelings of anxiety. That's what gives you the edge. That's what gives you the chance to perform well. But it's worth remembering that your brain has one purpose in life, which is to keep you alive and make you survive as a human species. So everything that it does is geared towards its pattern machine. Is that safe? Is that not safe? If it's not safe, I am going to run and get out of here. So when you leave the comfort of your chair to walk up to the front of the room, your brain is effectively saying, you just left that cave a couple of 100,000 years ago. You are now walking straight into the path of a saber-toothed tiger who's going to have you for lunch. Thank you very much. Now, when you walk up the front of that room today, you are not about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, but your brain still thinks you are. So that adrenaline, that rush, that fear is still there.
Okay.
So let's come to some straightforward techniques. It comes down to some fundamental things. Take one key one. How do you breathe when you get up there? The risk is that you're like this, you're panic breathing. You're just trying to get off stage. You just want to get it over, get done, get off stage and get back to your chair again.
Yeah.
But guess what? Your audience is now feeling the same for you, because they're empathizing with you. Oh, poor Rehearsal. We'll give her a smile. We'll give her a clap. We'll be polite, but can she please get back to her chair because we're feeling uncomfortable with her?
Yeah.
Whereas if when you get there, you can take a good, comfortable breath, nothing dramatic, just settle yourself before you start. You've helped yourself, you've helped your diaphragm lower, which helps bring the pace of the voice down, brings the tone of the voice down, and even the vagus nerve that sits in the background and watches all these things is going, yeah, Rehearsal's okay, we can deliver this with confidence. So some fundamental things like that can really, really help.
That is definitely interesting, and I agree. There are some times where I don't do that. And thinking back, there are times when I'm not anxious and there are times when I am anxious. And I think if I think back to it, it's probably exactly what you're saying now, as mine starts with my breathing. And when I breathe up here, I'm rushing to get that next breath. And I think that's where the anxiousness comes from. Whereas the times when I am breathing deep and low, I don't have that anxiousness. I probably have to train myself to remember to breathe deep and low down continuously. Yeah, sound advice. Thank you for that, Jezz.
Okay, just to round off on that, the chances are that you do that automatically in other aspects of your life. It might be yoga is something you do. It might be you've been involved in sports in now or earlier life. That type of approach to breathing you would have learnt and managed in that setting. But because your brain is now pulling out a different little index card, it's pulling out the card that says public speaking, I'm scared. It rushes you back into emergency panic breathing again. So to take yourself back into the zone where you know it worked and relate it back to something you know, job done.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I think what feels like forever when you're trying to calm yourself down on the stage, to you it feels like an age, but to the audience it's just like that. The time is a bit disproportionate, isn't it? When you're feeling anxious, that time slip seems an awful lot longer than it does to the audience. The audience won't notice the time that it takes you to calm down, will they?
Exactly, they won't. You are so right. When you are there, it might be something like addressing the meeting that week with the sales figures, or the other end of the scale, you might be in an expo with 1,000 people to speak to. But the situation is still the same for your poor old brain. But you're in a different time zone because your audience are all relaxed and comfortable. Like us, we're relatively chilled. We're sitting here or standing here quite comfortably and calm. But you have now put yourself into that danger zone. You're fired up with adrenaline and your brain is racing at many times the speed of the audience. The equivalent for me, an illustration that I use is to relate it almost to a car crash or a motorbike crash. If you've had that unfortunate experience, those couple of seconds before the collision went on forever. And that film you can run again and again and again, and it feels like forever. But the reality, it was just a couple of seconds. And you are so right, Alison. What to you feels forever, and you think, oh, I daren't go and look at my notes. They'll have left the room by the time I get back. Or I'm desperate for a glass of water, but I daren't take one because if I stop and just do this, they'll have switched off and run out. But you're so right. They didn't even notice. It was just a natural break for them. And what for you felt forever is just nothing to them at all.
So if this is a real phobia for you, public speaking, but perhaps you've got a job where you've been promoted and all of a sudden you've got to speak in public for the first time. I remember the first time that I did it all seemed so overwhelming and so terrifying. And that's before I even got to the anxiousness of just going onto the stage. If you're now in a position where you've got to do this for the first time, what are your top tips, maybe the top 3 tips of what to do to actually prepare for your first public speech?
Top tips. A practical one for the event itself is things like we've just discussed. Making sure that you breathe properly and use simple skills that you use in normal day life. So a practical example, if you are in the cafe with your colleagues, with your friends, and you've got a good story to tell, what you do not do is stare at the ceiling as you remember the joke you were going to tell with a serious face. No, what you do is you've got an exciting story to tell. You make sure you look them in the eye and get everyone's attention. And it's exactly the same from stage or from the front of the room. So firstly, there's those practical skills, things you do in normal life, put a different ticket against something. This is what I'm going to do when I'm public speaking. Secondly, think through what you're going to say. Scripting, whole sections of my workshops are on scripting, because you'll be surprised how many people, particularly when it's a networking event, you think, oh, I'll invent it in the car when I'm driving there. Whereas when I used to do public speaking competitions, actually, it feels like a couple of centuries ago, the maximum we worked to was for every minute of a speech, it was a week's worth of preparation. So a 7-minute competition speech was 2 months worth of work. Now, okay, no one's got that amount of time these days. This is, pre-Steam, let alone pre-computer. But to sit and think it through, to get the bullet points jotted down in your head, to get your brain wrapped around the ideas, and to get also the third thing, which leads on from that, is rehearsal. Practice, 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 rehearsal, 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 to get your mouth and lips around the words that you're going to say so that your brain knows what's coming up, to get you comfortable with the pauses, the bits where you're going to smile because it was relatively amusing. Getting that rehearsed and ready is so important. So those are the three practical, fundamental things, like making sure you take a good breath before you start. Script it. And you may have different ways of doing that. Some people like mind maps. I like old-fashioned writing things out. Some people prefer to do it on a screen, and then rehearse, 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 so that you're comfortable and confident in what you're saying.
Yeah. I've got to say, at least I know I'm on the right track, because I do those, and I do something very funny as well. So when I rehearse, I stand in front of the mirror.
Yes.
And make as if I'm talking to an audience, to also see what my facial expressions are and what will they be seeing.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you. I'm also one of those type of people. I cannot wing it. I need to be able to know what I'm going to be talking about. And yes, I can ad lib to that.
Yeah.
But I need to know the content I'm going to be speaking on. And so, like you, I prefer writing, and I actually write out my whole script. And I find it helps me to remember, and it helps me with what I'm going to say next.
Yes.
But it doesn't matter how prepared I am. At times, that mind just goes blank.
Yeah.
So what are the small tips that I can remember to say, okay, just that trigger will possibly bring back that thought and get me back on track?
I quite understand. Yes, it does happen, doesn't it? It's like you're going to make a speech, or even sing a piece of music, and suddenly it's just gone, absolutely gone. So two suggestions: one about keeping some notes for yourself, and the other about how to practice and rehearsal. Practice and rehearsal first. A little suggestion, simply because of the way it helps you remember things, is when you're rehearsing at home. And let's say you've got a talk that's in 5 sections. It's 5 little topics that you're going to be delivering. Work around the house as you deliver them. So for section 1, stand in the hallway and deliver section 1. Section 2, move to the next room in the house, the front room. Section 3, the back room. Section 4, the kitchen. However your house is laid out. And stick to that pattern as you rehearse and get used to it. Because what it helps you do is when you get onto stage, or when you're at the front of the room talking, you finish that section, that story, and now you're going on to the next point you're going to make, and you mentally make that journey into the front room with a cat staring at you from the table. Something triggers you to help remember the points.
Yeah.
And then the second half of that is to keep notes with you. And I do this. I have a memory like a sieve. So I'm a great fan of old-fashioned index cards with a little treasury tag through the corner.
Yeah.
And on those cards, I will have the key points, not the entire content. You can't pull an A4 sheet of paper out of your pocket in the middle of a talk. But if you've got key points on cards, or something that you can either have with you on the stage because it works for that environment, or on the desk, or even if they're just in your pocket, so you can actually sort of touch them with one hand, which again helps to trigger things. And worse, if push comes to shove, if your mind goes absolutely blank, you could always pull those cards out of your pocket, and it would take you just a second or two to flip over to page 3, a little smile to yourself, a smile to the audience, and you're back on track again.
Okay. I think what you said about pinning the cards together is vital.
Oh yeah.
Because I've seen people where the cards have got out of order and they're using the cards to talk from, and then they've lost their place.
Yeah.
Or also at the weekend, I saw somebody relying on their slides to actually prompt what came next, and their slides had got out of order. So he was talking, expecting a slide to come up, and then the wrong slide came up, and then he lost his thread completely.
Yeah.
But I think having the cards pinned together is so critical. But also, I think when you're talking about the rehearsal, at some point, if you're using slides and stuff, you have to rehearse with the slides as well, and make sure that the technology is working, don't you?
Yes, technology is going to let you down. Take it as given. Something is going to go wrong. So you've got to be prepared, and particularly if you're speaking quite a lot, you've got to be prepared for actually nothing to work. So that you could walk up the front there with just your notes and a big smile and capture the audience. Yeah, that's the worst scenario. But if you're prepared for that, then you can deal with really anything. Yeah, slides that go wrong, but if you know where they're supposed to be, you could always just press the button to blank the screen and just carry on. There's routes out of everything, but it comes back to practice and rehearsal again. And yes, you're so right. You need to know what's coming up. So it's lovely with today's screens. You can often have a laptop in front of you where the next one appears. But of course, the trouble is you rely on that and you go to perhaps an older venue and someone's got an older laptop and it's an older version of PowerPoint and it doesn't come up. So you've got to be ready for what's going to happen, expected and unexpected.
And when I do a presentation, I don't know if this is right or wrong, I like to come across more personable rather than scripted. Yes. And I find there are some people that just come across so scripted. So what advice would you give to them to just relax and loosen up and present as if you're enjoying this rather than reading off a script, even though you got it up here?
Do you know, it comes back again to rehearsal and practice. Let's take an example from a totally different world, the world of comedians. You know, I'm not a comic. I can't tell jokes for toffees. I've learned that over many years. But we're fortunate where I live in that we've got a local venue which is used by top London comedians. They try out their new material. So we had one recently, a young comedian, brilliant chap, getting ready for his world tour. And they make no secret about it. They're coming out to provincial theatres and they crack jokes on the stage and they say, well, I tried that one in Essex and it went down a barstorm. I tried it in Cornwall and it died. They're working through their material, which means that when they get to their world tour or they're at the O2, those little asides that look as if they're totally off the cuff, they've been rehearsed to within an inch of their life. So you're absolutely right. It's about getting comfortable with what you're saying to the point where you can relax and enjoy it. And if you hang everything off of stories, because that's what you remember as a human being. You don't remember 64 bullet points on a screen. You don't remember a whole line of data. What you remember is the story behind that information. So if you hang it off of stories and you've just got a list in your head of the 5 stories that you're going to tell, even if you have a meltdown, you can always come back to the story headings, and that gives you that freedom to expand a bit, come back a bit, go off script, keeping an eye on the time, of course, but you've got the story to tell, not a scripted line of bullet points.
What if you're in corporate though? I mean, going back to the scenario where you've just been promoted, you've got to start speaking in public as part of your role. How would you weave stories into that scenario where essentially what you're delivering is work related, it could be quite technical? So how do you get the balance in that scenario?
To me, that's about thinking what is the effect of what you just delivered? You might have just delivered some information on the, come back to that example, the previous week's sales figures. So why couldn't you open that section with, let's look at the effect of last week's sales in terms of what happened on consumer demand or our stores in Basildon and Brighton, and just give a practical example of what happened and then give the information behind it. I'll give you one short example from a client who, I won't mention his name, but he won't mind me, if he sees this, won't mind me saying it, an analyst in the world of agriculture and overseas investment. And he had this most amazing picture on screen, or rather amazing set of data. It was so busy, and it was all technical data about rainfall, about weather, about climate, everything that could happen in a foreign country. And I just said, what's this all about? And he said, well, it's quite simple, really. If you invest your money in agriculture in the wrong part of the world in the rainy season, your truck's going to fall over in the mud, it all rots, and you've lost your money. Brilliant. Put a picture up of a truck in the mud in that country, and now give us the data behind it. So even with the driest and dullest of information, if you can find what it means and to get a story and an image relating to what it means, the audience is with you. Okay, some people love figures and some people want that data, but most want something to hang on to, and an image and a story is what they hang on to.
So you've touched on 2 aspects, and I hope I'm going to remember them both. Maybe I should just mention both, and then you can decide how you want to feed back on that. So the one I've been thinking about is the audience, and how important is it to know who your audience will be. And then secondly, you touched on in terms of, if you can hang on to a story and show people stuff. So some people, it's more visual. Some people, they're more auditory. Some people are more in terms of kinesthetic, in terms of the touchy-feely things. And your audience is going to have different aspects of people in there in terms of how they're taking that information. So for somebody who's going to present, how do they take all of that together, remembering the audience and who's going to be in the audience, and see how they can touch almost everybody that's there, that's listening to this presentation?
Your first point there was a very good one. Who is your audience? If someone just has a standard talk for their business that they just deliver exactly the same pattern to every single event and every single type of audience, that's not understanding your audience, is it? If you're going to meet someone, you have an important client and you're going to meet them personally for the first time, yes, of course you're going to walk in with a smile and a handshake and say hi. But I think any of us in our world would have done some research beforehand. We'd have had a quick look at them. We'd have Googled them, had a quick look. We'd have looked them up on LinkedIn or other social media to see what they're interested in. Maybe even use some personality profiling to understand how they think, so that when you go and meet them with that handshake and that warm smile, you talk to them in language that they understand. Why shouldn't we do the same with an audience? If I'm going to work with a new audience, and if I'm part of an all-day conference and I'm doing a slot of skills and fun to take them away from figures, I would want to know who are they? What do they do? What are their industry touch points? What sort of topics are they talking about that day? What are the hashtags, social media for that event, so you can keep an eye on it? And perhaps best of all, as a good speaker, you'll arrive nice and early to check out the tech and the IT and the microphones. Talk to the people in the room just to see what they are talking about that day. And that will give you, that combination will give you the language and the feel of the room. That gives you the chance to talk to them in language that they know and they understand. You're on their level. So that all combines, both of those points combine. Understand the audience, and that enables you to direct it to what type of information they want to receive.
Thank you, Jezz. There's an awful lot of amazing hints and tips in there for people to go away and work with. We're nearly at the end of our time already, unfortunately.
I've got one more question.
You've got one more question, sorry.
So, yeah, just one more question from my side. And I've got a couple of acquaintances and friends, and they go to groups like Toastmasters and other groups where they can learn presentation skills and be comfortable in talking in front of people. What's your advice around that to people thinking about wanting to do things like that?
I often recommend Toastmasters because there's usually one running somewhere close to you. They're all over the UK. And it's horses for courses. Where I was talking to a client this morning, what he wants to do is just meet one-to-one because it's really intensive and he knows exactly what he wants to achieve, and he hasn't got the time, quite frankly. But if going to something regularly, weekly, fortnightly, however much that group meets, regularly contributing, regularly getting feedback, constructive feedback on how you've delivered and what you could do to improve, Toastmasters is brilliant for that. So and there are other, Toastmasters is a well-known name. There are other examples. Probably the best thing to do is to Google speaking clubs in your locality, because you don't want to be traveling 50 miles if there's something that's 3 miles around the corner. Even in my hometown, I think of 2 organizations where people meet regularly to practice, to rehearse and get feedback and get better. So organizations like that, thoroughly recommended to help you.
Very relevant question. Anything else?
No, I promise that's the last, because otherwise we can continue on this topic for a long time.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Jezz, if somebody's interested in working with you, can you just give a brief overview of what sort of services you offer? Just reiterate your business name and where people can find you on social media and on the web and how to contact you. That would be fantastic.
Certainly. The simplest way to find me is actually just Google Jezz Ray. That's G-E-S, then surname Ray, R-A-Y. It's a name that I've acquired over the years, and rather usefully, it's the only one in the world when you Google it. So I'm easy to find. You'll find me on LinkedIn under Jezz Ray. You'll find me on Twitter, actually under Jezz Speaking, because it just seemed quite nice at the time. And jezz.ray@speakinginpublic.info is the email. But just Google Jezz Ray, G-E-S-R-A-Y, and you'll find me fairly quickly. In terms of the services I offer, 3 main areas. If you're a team within a business, then to run a workshop for your team is at the core of what I do. That is an immersive experience with video and audio clips to get you going before the day, a themed intensive day, and then follow up Zoom calls like this every month for 6 months so that we embed what you learned and it's not just a one-off example. So team workshops. I also tend to be with senior leaders one-to-one, often when there's something big coming up, suddenly got a spot at an expo, and that extra percentage point of a refinement will come in very useful. And something that's more recent, often these days people have to deliver via a screen. So just as we are, it might be that you and your team no longer travel around the country delivering workshops on technical topics, but you're sitting behind a screen to deliver it. So now you need a combination of not just speaking skills, but engagement skills, scripting skills, storytelling skills, story creation skills, and how to use a screen, the camera, green screens, etc. So that's another team workshop that I run. So those are the 3 main areas of my business. And just Google Jezz Ray, and I'd be delighted to talk with you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have a book that people could probably purchase on Amazon as well.
That's a lovely segue. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah. So I have a book called Speak Performance, because it's all about the performance of speaking. It is pocket size, jacket pocket size. Slip it in your pocket, slip it in your bag to dip into on the train on the way to a meeting where you want that last minute practical preparation. So it's not an ethereal, massive, great tune that sits in your desk. It's a practical, thumb through it, have a laugh because there's some daft pictures of me in there, pick up the practical tips on the way. So it's called Speak Performance on Amazon, or again, just Google Jezz Ray and it will pop up for you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jezz. Really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for your time.
And thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for the tips. And yes, I'll be able to apply some of them. And I just need to remember, breathe. Okay, thank you so much.